In this presentation, I'll introduce a few terms and skills you'll need to understand in order to complete Mini Essay 2. We'll be discussing what a secondary source is and learn how to annotate a secondary source effectively so that way you can have a clear understanding of the argument, demonstrate that understanding to someone else, and begin to relate this argument to your own research, which you are beginning the process of accumulating for Essay 3. The first thing we need to know is what is a secondary source. I'll spend more time on this in the next slide presentation when we discuss primary and secondary sources. Basically, secondary sources provide commentary. That is, they offer arguments and research-based perspectives. Articles and book-length studies are the most common form of secondary sources. We've read various secondary sources so far, the first of which being Leon Seltzer's article on self-righteous assertiveness. The most recent are by Michelle Obama, James Surowiecki, and Sally Kohn. When selecting a secondary source to annotate, we always want to keep in mind its credibility. How much can we trust it? And its relevance. Why does it matter? How does it relate to my research problem? We'll speak about credibility in the next presentation. Once we've found a secondary source worth remembering, we'll want to annotate it so that way we don't rely on our memory. We've got way too much to remember, so we're creating a memory aid that will help us better understand what was said and how it connects to what we have to say. That's one way of looking at an annotation. The first part, the what was said, not everything that's said matters, so we have to identify the highlights of the argument. These highlights include the topic, context, problem, response, support, and the warrant. You should be pretty familiar with all these terms by now except warrant. Remember, that's an assumption. Sometimes they're stated and sometimes they're not. Many warrants are always at play, so we just want to focus on the big picture warrant, the one that connects the thesis to its support. That's another thing. We've come to treat support as twofold, reason and evidence. When I refer to support with regards to a summary, I only mean the reasons. And I'm talking big reasons, those that support the thesis. Where do we find these? Well, usually in the topic sentence claims. Remember that topic sentence claims require support too. But that topic sentence claims also act as reasons that support the major claim, the thesis statement. So to find the support that matters for the summary, just look at the topic sentence claims that directly support the thesis. This slide also lists some other things that should guide the style of your summary. Please write your summary according to these guidelines. My grading will be based on them. Regarding summarizing in a logical fashion, if you present the elements in the order I've listed them, from topic all the way to warrant, you'll have that logical flow I desire. Please take a moment to read this list carefully. The last thing I'd like to add, do not include any quotes in the summary. A summary is only in your own words. Before I detail each of the different questions you'll need to answer in the evaluation, I want to talk about slant, because you'll need to know what the slant of the article is in order to answer those questions completely. Slant refers to how someone looks at something. The how is important here. By how, I mean what ideas and values does this person seem to have that influences the way they see this particular problem and respond to it. Indeed, this slant will lead them to a particular interpretation. Just as this slant can provide the expert with an interpretation, it may also limit him or her from looking at the issue from different perspectives. This may occur because an expert's training influences what he or she sees. Consider the example presented in this slide. Let's use the often talked about topic of the obesity epidemic. If we were to ask a medical doctor to look at the obesity epidemic, the doctor is likely to focus on the factors affecting the physical health of obese individuals. Because the doctor sees the problem as one of the body, the doctor may respond to the problem by suggesting diet and exercise. But let's move away from the medical slant for a second and consider how an economist might see the obesity epidemic. Because the economist is trained to look at the circulation of money, the economist might see the problem as one not of the body, but of the wallet. From an economic slant, the obesity epidemic becomes a market problem, where healthy food, because of its high price, is less available and accessible to consumers. The economist may think the answer is to increase the presence of healthy food restaurants or lower the price of fruits and vegetables. The warrant behind this economic slant may be something like, if we change prices, we change what the consumers buy. The change may lead to a reduction in the rate of obesity because healthier food would be better available and more accessible to the population. To review, the doctor's medical slant led to an interpretation of the problem as being of the body, and thus the solution was about helping the body. The economic slant interpreted the obesity epidemic as a money problem, and consequently the economist responded by changing prices. So you can see that a slant affects how a problem is viewed, and therefore the response to the problem. They are all connected. In order for us to better evaluate an argument, we need to pay attention to the slant. Now that you understand the importance of slant to an argument, let's take a look at the 3 tasks you'll need to complete to write the evaluation. The first thing you'll need to do is connect the source to your own research. Explain why the source is relevant to your research topic. Then analyze the slant of the writer. When you analyze the slant of the writer, be sure to describe the beliefs and values of the writer's slant and explain how these beliefs and values lead to a certain view of the problem and the response offered. Finally, propose a completely different slant, an alternative slant. This alternative slant doesn't need to be opposed or against the source's slant, but it does need to be distinct. For instance, if you found an article written by a scientist, don't propose an alternative slant that's also from a scientist, unless you can explain differences in scientific disciplines. Let's say the first scientist was a biologist. The proposed alternative scientist would have to be something different, like an ecologist, a scientist who studies the environment. Let's use the scientist example again. The slant of a farmer, someone like Wendell Berry or Elliot Coleman, would be an alternative slant to the scientists. In fact, I recommend looking at the backgrounds of the writers we've read, which can be found at the beginning of each article included in the Food Matters book. Each of these backgrounds indicates a particular slant. The point is that the alternative slant needs to be distinguished from the original slant of the source you're evaluating, because we want to consider different ways to see a problem and to respond to it. All 3 tasks relating the source to your research, identifying the source's slant, and considering an alternative slant help us evaluate a source effectively. When combined with the summary, not only will you have a complete annotation, but you'll also have a developed understanding of the source so you can better know how to use it for your research paper.